Hello, listeners. Today is March 17th, 2025, and this is Voiceover Work, an audiobook sampler. Where do you listen? And now, from the book titled Philosophers' Mental Models by Peter Hollins, comes another episode of Voiceover Work. Peter Hollins is a productive author who writes definitive guides on various topics. He's written over 40 books, covering subjects such as personal development, productivity, and more. His newest book, Philosophers' Mental Models, distills complex philosophical theories into simple, easy-to-understand mental models that can be used in practical ways. In this audiobook, Peter takes some of the most profound and impactful ideas from famous philosophers like Nietzsche, Kant, Confucius, Sartre, and others. He then breaks them down into actionable insights you can use to improve your life and decision-making process. The concepts are timeless, but Peter's explanations bring them into modern context. The Philosophers' Mental Models audiobook is available on Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. And for more information about Peter Hollins and his work, visit bit.ly/Peter Hollins. This is the chapter-by-chapter preview of Peter Hollins' new book, Philosophers' Mental Models. Chapter 1. Intellectual Decision-Making. Choices are the hinges of destiny. Edwin Markham. What makes a person's life a success? Is it luck, genetics, upbringing, hard work, or temperament? Some people seem to have been born with all the blessings and opportunities you could hope for, yet they don't succeed. Others, seemingly, start with nothing, but reach unexpected levels of accomplishment. Why? An often overlooked life skill is decision-making and problem-solving. Every single one of us will face a life full of problems. Big problems, trivial problems. But it's arguable that the presence and size of problems is less important than how we solve those problems. In a way, we are all cursed with a staggering degree of freedom. At every moment, there are countless paths ahead of us, each one branching off again to further decision points all throughout life. How are we to navigate our way through this maze? We could focus on cultivating useful traits and characteristics, such as discipline or resilience, or tackle our limitations and bad habits on a psychological level, like low self-esteem or procrastination. These are all excellent things to focus on. In this book, however, we'll be exploring the skill of better decision-making itself, and how knowing how to choose wisely can greatly influence your success and well-being in life. We'll do this by exploring a series of mental models that all have something to teach us about free will, choice, and knowledge. Which mental model is the best one? Well, that's just it. All of them have potential value. By considering each mental model in turn, according to our purposes, we'll be learning the meta-skill of using our own thinking modes as tools in a sophisticated toolkit. Think of this book as a kind of theoretical microscope. Usually microscopes have a revolving objective lens that you can turn so that you're peering at the same slide, but at different levels of magnification. This allows you to see the sample in very many different ways. What may be uninteresting and blurry under one lens may suddenly reveal itself to be fascinatingly clear using another. As you read through each chapter, try to imagine that each model is a lens through which to view your own problems, choices, and decision points in life, big and small. Some of these lenses zoom right into the tiny details. Others zoom out and consider a broader, impressionistic view. Some explore the morality and wisdom of a decision. Others pull different things into focus: the utility, the logic, the practicality of a choice, and so on. Just like with a real microscope, switching through these different lenses may allow you to eventually find just the right one that brings everything into clear, brilliant focus. As you read, bear in mind that not every mental model will be relevant or applicable. That said, with a little curiosity and open-mindedness, you may be surprised at just what you learn when you take a completely different perspective on the problem than you ordinarily would have. Use the power. Chapter 2. Moral and Ethical Decision-Making. Descartes was a mathematician, and Venn was a logician. William of Ockham was a theologian and Catholic apologist, but the principle for which he is best known is one that concerns his natural philosophy and logical arguments, not his faith. All of this is to say that when it comes to wanting to make decisions that feel logical, rational, and intellectually sound, it makes sense to turn to those theories and mental models that come to us from the world of philosophy and science. However, doing the right thing isn't always the right thing. In this chapter, let's take a look at all of life's problems and big decisions using an entirely different set of lenses. We'll consider the Buddhist law of karma and how it helps us understand the web of cause and effect that creates and sustains our life, and how to choose an action according to its consequence. We'll also explore the analogy called Chesterton's fence, which can help us become more aware of all those consequences of our actions that may currently be invisible to us. Finally, we'll look at the ancient Chinese concept of Wu Wei, which considers the principle of action in its reverse, i.e., what we can do by choosing not to do anything at all. Let's dive in. The law of karma. Karma is the eternal assertion of human freedom. Our thoughts, our words, and deeds are the threads of the net which we throw around ourselves. Swami Vivekananda. Karma may be one of the most widely known, but also most widely misunderstood topics in Buddhism. It comes from the Sanskrit word for action. Karma is said to be a principle describing how actions naturally grow out of thoughts and feelings, and how those actions themselves then create our world through the power of cause and effect. Over time, our thoughts and feelings become actions, and when repeated often enough, those actions become habits, and a whole world of effects and results springs from that. Moral philosophy and ethics take a completely different view on the big questions of our lives, and so offers a different approach to making decisions and solving problems. In the Western imagination, karma is sometimes simply associated with the basic idea of justice, but the principle is far more complicated. For Buddhists, karma is the idea that everything in this world that exists right now came into being because of a particular cause. Some of those causes will be human behavior. In this model of the world, virtuous actions bring about happiness and harmony, and unvirtuous actions bring about suffering. If you plant a seed in the ground, and all the conditions are just right, the seed will sprout and grow. In the same way, if you plant the seed of anger or desire or fear in yourself, and the conditions are just right, that seed will sprout and bring about real consequences in the world around you. If all the necessary conditions align without opposition, a particular effect is inevitable. Of course, humans have the freedom to resist certain actions, to cultivate others, and so on. The seed has a natural inclination to grow. We, as humans, may also come into the world with natural inclinations, our karmic urge to take this or that action. This urge is like momentum, like a habit that has been learned over time. Chapter 3. Meaning and Long-Term Decision-Making. Let's once more turn the objective lens on our theoretical microscope and take a look at the problems and decisions of life in yet another way. It's one thing to ponder over the smaller choices, what to have for breakfast, which Netflix show to watch, whether to take your umbrella to work or leave it at home. As we zoom out, however, we start to see the finer details of logic, rationality, and cause and effect dissolve, and a bigger picture comes into focus. In the long term, how do all these details add up to create a life? What do we see if we stop considering the individual brushstrokes of the painting of our life and take a step back to see the overall picture? What is the scene we have created? Is it in proportion? Does it all hang together? Is it beautiful? In this section, we take a more abstract and philosophical look at choice, free will, and the unfolding of our lives. We'll consider the work of Nietzsche, Pascal, and the Zen Buddhists. Nietzschean eternal recurrence. My doctrine says the task is to live in such a way that you must wish to live again. You will anyway. Nietzsche. Let's get one thing straight. The work of philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche has always been difficult to interpret, even by, or perhaps most, by other philosophers. Nietzsche was a nihilist, which meant that he thought that all values were unfounded, that life essentially lacked meaning, and that nothing in life could really be known or communicated. Whereas most people would see this stance as a little depressing, Nietzsche seems to argue that it instead poses an exhilarating potential for human freedom. In fact, the only real hope is in embracing this meaninglessness. If life is really meaningless, and no values or decisions are better or worse than any others, how on earth can we conduct ourselves? Nietzsche's mental model here is the doctrine of the eternal recurrence. The idea is that whatever you choose for yourself, you should try to imagine what it will be like to make that decision over and over again, eternally. Think of it as a type 0 decision. Not only is the consequence irreversible and permanent, but it repeats in a loop forever. It's a strange concept, but Nietzsche clearly intended for it to help us discern a particular quality behind our choices that went beyond them being practical, conventional, convenient, or morally good. Nietzsche advises us to never act in a way where we hold in the back of our minds the hope that we can always change our minds later. Rather, we should choose in a way that we will be willing to endure the consequences forever. It's arguable whether the philosopher thought that life actually was this way, or merely that it might be helpful to imagine it did as a kind of thought experiment. Some have suggested, Nadim Hussein, for example, that the exercise is one that helps us reframe the meaninglessness of life and actually live in hope and freedom. In this section, we're not going to get carried away with deeper philosophical examination of Nietzsche's ideas. Rather, we'll see if his overall mental model can be adapted to our own ends. If you're facing a major life decision... Chapter 4. Problem Solving in Decision-Making. In this chapter, we're going to play around with ideological lenses that turn things upside down, back to front, or inside out. First, by considering via negativa, or the negative path, we will learn to remove elements from a problem or situation, rather than attempting to add elements. And in our contemplation of the idea that the map is not the territory, we will concern ourselves not with the virtues of our mental model, but with all the things that model can't do. Finally, we'll look at the tale of Buridan's ass and turn the entire idea of problem-solving upside down. Sometimes it's not a question of choice A versus choice B, but rather a comparison between choosing any choice versus remaining in a state of impotent indecision. Let's take a closer look. Via negativa, subtraction as a path to truth. It is remarkable how much long-term advantage people like us have gotten by trying to be consistently not stupid, instead of trying to be very intelligent. Charlie Munger. When we're faced with a tricky decision, we usually focus on one question: what should I do? Similarly, when solving a problem, we look at the situation and try to think of what we need to introduce to correct things. For example, we can't focus on our work, so we dream up ways to add more discipline or productivity. We lack purpose, so we try to find one. We see that we're ill and start to wonder about which medicine we can take or treatment we can receive. All of these approaches, however, are additive. They're about putting in what we believe is lacking. This approach makes sense. In a confusing situation, we naturally know more about what's going wrong than what's going right, so that's where we focus our attention. But there's another opposite approach we could take. We could think about what needs to be removed. This is a subtractive process and the essence of a mental model called via negativa, or the negative way. Much like Pascal's wager was initially offered as proof for the existence of God, the subtractive epistemology of via negativa was originally a theological exercise pondering the nature of God. The idea was that because God's infinite and supreme attributes could never be fully expressed by man, we could instead make more progress by expressing all the things that God is not. By gradually eliminating from God's definition all the things that he is not, we approach the problem from the other direction. Not only is this easier for us mere mortals, but it helps us logically whittle away at possibilities until we're left with what must be true or accurate. This approach is ancient, and a version is found in the Hindu Upanishads and the Avadhuta Gita, where it's called neti neti, which translates to not this, not that. To understand the nature of Brahman, i.e., the ultimate reality of the universe or God, we meditate on what Brahman isn't. So, to better grasp the nature of something we don't know well and cannot calculate with any precision, we look at what we do know well and can calculate more clearly. Chapter 5. Embracing the unknown in decision-making. In our final chapter, we face directly a part of decision-making that we have only so far hinted at: uncertainty and the unknown. Decision-making would be far, far easier if we always knew the outcome of every choice and could accurately predict every consequence, but of course we can't. While being able to weigh up costs and payoffs is a useful skill, it's really the essence of the unknown, of that unmeasurable X factor that most stumps the best of us. How do we get around the fact that there are simply things that we cannot grasp or understand? How can we act wisely without complete knowledge? In this final chapter, we will use our microscope, more like a telescope, and take the broadest possible view of human free will and choice. We'll consider whether there is any potential for freedom and meaning in a world that we can only ever partially understand. Transformational change and the vampire analogy. Burdin's ass only had to decide whether to go for the water or the hay first. Human beings, in real life, have far, far more complex decisions to make. The decisions most likely to stump us are big, life-altering ones, whether to marry or divorce, whether to take the leap and move to some far-flung country to start over, whether to commit to an occupation that will require years of dedication and learning, whether to have children, how many children to have. With these kinds of decisions, it can feel almost impossible to know what we're really dealing with. In fact, Lori Ann Paul, professor of philosophy at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, says that this feature of big decisions is something we should really lean into. To illustrate the real nature of what she calls transformative decisions, she points to the story of how a vampire becomes a vampire. Let's say someone comes to you one day and offers you the choice to become a vampire. They will bite your neck, and in that moment, you will be set on the irreversible path of being a vampire for all eternity. There's no going back. Let's say there are some attractive benefits to being a vampire, but also some drawbacks. It's a decision worth considering carefully. Now, you could read plenty of books on what to expect after being turned into a vampire. You could chat with vampires and ask them their opinions. You could look at vampire statistics and read first-hand accounts of those who both regretted their decision and those who were glad they chose what they did. But Lorianne Paul says that none of this really matters. Why? Because once you're turned into a vampire, you are no longer yourself. You are a vampire. And from that moment, everything will look different to you. You've undergone a transformational change, and by definition, this is not something you can predict your response to. You cannot know what you will make of a decision until you make it, and by that time, it may be too late. In the same way, getting married or divorced, having a child, moving to another country, and so on, are all precisely the kinds of decisions that will fundamentally change your frame of reference. Your values, your understanding, your experience, your perception, and the way you make meaning will be changed by the decision itself. So, as a human offered vampirehood, the prospect of immortality might have seemed pretty cool. But when you actually are immortal, you're suddenly privy to it. If you've enjoyed today's episode and found value in these philosophical insights, I invite you to check out the full book, Philosophers' Mental Models, How to Think Like Lao Tzu, Descartes, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, Plato, and more, by Peter Hollins. You can find it on Amazon in Kindle or print format. Additionally, an audiobook version is available on Amazon, iTunes, and Audible for those who prefer listening on the go. Don't let this opportunity to level up your mind pass you by. Dive in today. Thanks for joining me on this journey through history's greatest thinkers' minds. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and, most importantly, keep applying these powerful insights to your life. The world is waiting for what only you can bring to it.